Hello everyone, my name is Araf Malik. Today, I'm here to talk about a topic that is very important and personal to me. Let us imagine a Bangladesh where there is nothing but peace and prosperity, where there is no poverty, no hunger, and people have access to medical centers, education centers, and better infrastructure. In my TED Talk, I'm going to outline some of the policies that the government of the People's Republic of Bangladesh could implement to achieve this dream. But before I do that, I'm going to start off by talking about the history of Bangladesh looking through the lens of the history of South Asia. Because before 1947, Bangladesh politically was part of South Asia as part of the British Empire. So now let's begin. Now, before I talk about the history, I also want to talk about why it's very important to look at the history. It's a necessity for all the governments to focus on the past, especially the colonized countries such as Bangladesh. Because before colonization, our countries used to have a rich history in terms of culture, a stable economy, and a prosperous society. By looking at the history of Bangladesh, we can see the potential of countries like Bangladesh and the potential of South Asia in general. Moreover, by looking at the history, we can fight some of the pessimism that many Bangladeshis have about our country, and it would help to build the narrative about our country's future. By looking at the history, we can also see that since countries like Bangladesh did it once in the past they were a prosperous nation, they can also do it in the future. Now, what do we need? What do we need for Bangladesh? We need economic prosperity. Now, some people might say that by becoming economically prosperous, we are just creating another materialistic world, we're just creating another materialistic country. While this is true, economic prosperity would create a materialistic society. However, that is necessary because economic prosperity also has a moral justification. When there is economic prosperity, there will be more people out of hunger. There will be more people who would have access to better infrastructure. So now let's look at the history of South Asia during colonization. During colonization, $45 trillion worth of assets were transferred through resource exploitation, taxes, and profits from the Indian labor between 1757 and 1947. The share of global GDP before colonization was around 23%, and the share of GDP after colonization in 1947 was around only 4%. There were also a lot of famines during colonization, such as the Great Bengal famine, the Utkal famine, and the Dojibara famine. But what was Bangladesh, or what was South Asia like before colonization? Before colonization, South Asia led the world in global textile production. In fact, 20% of the global textiles were produced here. It was also a global trade hub for exporting spices, textiles, and silk. And it had around 22% of the global GDP in it. It was also a very centralized bureaucracy with a very simple yet effective land revenue tax system. It was also the world's largest producer of cotton and held about 25% of the world's gold and silver reserves. Now, let's talk about the future of Bangladesh and what policies our government could implement to ensure economic prosperity for our people. To begin, in my opinion, one of the things that needs to be done is the liberalization of the economy. By lifting tariffs on the raw materials, it would help the producers of our country. Bangladesh has to import most of the raw materials that we use for the production of the goods and services in our country. By lifting the tariff on the raw materials, it would become easier for the producers to produce the goods here. We also need a very simple yet effective tax system. Currently, our tax system is very complicated. That's one of the reasons it's very hard for people to pay their taxes because of the complication with the tax system. It's also hard for the tax enforcers to enforce those rules because of the complication of the complicated and very difficult tax system to interpret. By having a simple yet effective tax system, the government would be able to enforce those tax codes onto the people, and it would be easier for the people to pay the taxes. The government also needs to open importing and exporting routes with other nations for food, raw materials, etc. A lot of nationalist sentiments in the country might say that we need to be self-sufficient in our food production. While that seems like a fantastic idea, it's not a realistic one. We have over 160 million people in our country, and we have a very small land area. So it's not very realistic to say that we are going to produce all of the food that we consume in our country. By opening importing routes, it would enable our country's food security to be more safer and more efficient. For example, Singapore is one of the world's smallest countries, yet it has a quite large population. However, it doesn't produce most of the food that it consumes. It in fact imports most of the food from other parts of the world. Yet, it is one of the safest countries in the world when it comes to food security. Moreover, some people might say that by lifting the tariffs, it would decrease the government revenue, which could have been used for infrastructure development. While this is true, I'm going to address later in the slides some of the ways that the government could increase the government revenue needed for infrastructure development. Moreover, it is very important to establish special economic zones near the divisions of Chittagong, Dhaka, and the cities like Cox's Bazar with tax incentives. A lot of special economic zones have been proposed and some work is being done to build those zones. However, there is no enthusiasm about those special economic zones. For example, let's talk about Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is a country right now, if anyone brings up the topic or the topic about the country of Saudi Arabia, one of the things that they're going to talk about is NEOM, which is the special economic zone that the Saudi government is building. However, when people talk about Bangladesh, they usually or they would never talk about a special economic zone being built here. It's necessary for the government to build a hype or media campaign for those special economic zones, to build enthusiasm about it, in order to make sure that the foreign investors and even domestic investors are aware of the work that is being done so that they invest in those zones. Now talking about the government revenue. As I've said, the decreased tariffs would lead to a fall in the government revenue, which is needed, obviously, for infrastructure development. There are many ways that the government could increase its government revenue. For example, by having an effective bond trading system. Developing countries don't have access to banking system, to bank accounts. For this reason, the government could try to solve that problem by opening an effective bond trading system where people can deposit their money, see some returns, and invest in government bonds. And the government could use that money to build infrastructure toward the country. Another thing that the government could do to increase revenue is to establish state-run corporations like ICBC, China Mobile, Emirates, and even sovereign wealth funds that are seen in other countries like Singapore, China, United Arab Emirates, etc. Now, some people might say that state-run corporations are likely to be inefficient and they're likely to be more corrupt. Well, it may be true, but if you look at all the countries that have developed massively in the last 50 years, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's in Southeast Asia, or whether it's in the Far East, many of those countries had state-run corporations and still do. Now, one of the problems with state-run corporations is corruption, which I'm going to talk about later in my TED Talk. And finally, the government could use that revenue to build infrastructure like airports, roads, highways, schools, infrastructure such as hospitals, etc. But most importantly, when we talk about countries like Bangladesh, we're not really talking about it unless we talk about the people who live here. We have 170 million people. It's one of the largest countries in the world in terms of population size. For this reason, in order to improve the country, in order to ensure economic prosperity, there has to be massive investments into the people. And this could be done through massive government spending, through having built schools, which would create a generation of doctors, engineers, etc. In short, we need more skilled labor in Bangladesh. There also has to be structural change in the education to teach people about social, technical, and life skills. And schools, universities, and vocational centers have to be built throughout the country, not just in cities like Dhaka, but in villages, union, and upazilas. The vocational centers should be also open to people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. One of the reasons is because many people, when they were young, they were not able to study because of family obligations. By having these vocational centers open to everyone, it would enable people who wish to study, who wish to uplift themselves, who wish to be part of the skilled labor force, to educate and to have a better life. For this reason, it's very much necessary to open the education system for everyone so that Bangladesh is able to create a skilled labor force. Now, talking about the government initiatives. We have, again, 170 million people. And one of the best things about having a lot of people is that we would be able to create a lot of industries. That's why it's very important that the government subsidizes local industry to support their growth. From technology to AI to automobile to education to aviation to STEM, there are a lot of industries that the government could subsidize to promote their exporting growth. And by promoting them, it would create jobs for people throughout the country, it would increase the GDP, and it would increase the GDP per capita, HDI, for everyone who lives in this country. It's also very much necessary to offer affordable housings to people in Bangladesh. Looking at Singapore, for example, Singapore didn't have a proper housing system in the 1960s, but the government's initiative to build affordable housing options for its citizens enabled many Singaporeans to now live in a very prosperous and comfortable life. For this reason, the government needs to subsidize housing and offer affordable housing to people through building high-rises. And this could be financed through offering people interest-free loans. The education should be also made free and mandatory until universities. By making it free until universities, it would enable a skilled labor force to be born in this country. And the mandatory part is very much necessary because in our country, many people, even if they want to go to school, they can't because of family obligations. By making it mandatory, it would ensure that everyone goes to school and is a part of the skilled labor force. Now, let's talk about the cultural education. Governments in Bangladesh, governments throughout the developing world need to use schools to improve the cultural education of the country. What do I mean by that? Through schools, we could ensure that the perspectives on the country is changed. And this would enable to build confidence in the economy. And this could be done through teaching historical lessons of not just the past 100 years. Most of the Bangladeshi historical lessons are focused either around the 1947 partition or the 1971 war, or sometimes go back as back as the past 100 years. But it's important to look at the past 500 years to build confidence in our economy. It's also very much necessary to teach people, to teach children about etiquette, such as following traffic rules, such as following and respecting elders, such as teaching them what to do in different conditions. The education should also not stop there. It should also educate the government officials who are going to work in the country. And they should be taught to be patriotic. Now, patriotic can mean many things for many people. Patriotism can mean to be loyal to the national government. But the government officials should be trained to be patriotic, not to the government, to the national government, but to the people. If they work for the people, then they're going to ensure that proper policies are being implemented to ensure that development is being done here. Now talking about corruption and how to fix it. In fact, corruption is one of the things that has plagued developing countries like Bangladesh. And there are many ways it can be fixed. For example, it's very much necessary to increase the salaries of the public officials. One of the things that Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore did in the 1960s is that he increased the salary of the public officials to discourage corruption from taking place. Moreover, there also has to be a cultural campaign against corruption and crime. By stigmatizing corruption as a villainous activity, the government could discourage people, government officials, and everyone from engaging in corrupt activities because it's likely to make them socially excluded. So it's very much necessary to do a cultural campaign against corruption. There also has to be strict punishment for crimes such as theft, murder, vandalism, etc. A lot of countries, again, who have developed in the last 50 years have strict crimes against these heinous activities. The law enforcement agencies should also be taught to work for the people instead of against the people. This would create trust in the law enforcement agencies and police throughout Bangladesh. Moreover, a lot of Bangladeshis don't have faith in the police, in the law enforcement agencies. In order to solve that issue, there should be media campaign done to show that the police, the law enforcement agencies, are friends of the people and they're working with the people and not against the people. Now, can it be done? Some people might say no, because the social structure prevents revolutionary changes. If you look at all the developing countries, all the countries that were former colonies, the way they are run is eerily similar to the way the colonizers ran their country. For this reason, it's very hard to bring on revolutionary changes. Moreover, if these policies were to be implemented, they would also have extreme lag time, and they would also have short-term uncertainty. For this reason, it's very much necessary that the government works with the people to implement these policies. Now, this could be done if the government actually has a great initiative, if they have a great way to uplift the people of the country. To erase the short-term uncertainty, it's necessary that the government communicates the plan with the people through a great public initiative or a manifesto. If the government works independent and doesn't communicate to the people their plans, it's unlikely to work successfully. If people know what the government is doing, then it's likely to make sure that they're aware of the government's intentions and the plan is likely to work properly. Thank you. My name is Araf Malik, and I hope that through my TED Talk, I was able to convey some of the things that the government could do to uplift the people of Bangladesh. Thank you.